Okay, so we're going to review the week's news in Ukraine. Start with Saturday, the 24th of June. So we're still in the mutiny. We're right in the thick of it. The mutiny is a challenge to Putin. The challenge to Putin exposed some weaknesses according to certain headlines, and I think that's pretty fair because before that, everybody. So if it didn't expose weaknesses, everybody wouldn't have been shocked like they were, because nobody thought that that could have happened. Prigozhin invaded Ukraine, entered Rostov. Putin vowed to punish the armed uprising. Sergevin came out against the uprising, which was a shock to a lot of people. Prigozhin withdrew from Russia. En route to Moscow, Wagner forces were hit with artillery, helicopter fire. They shot down some helicopters. And then Wagner agreed to end the insurrection. And what we know is Prigozhin went to Belarus and they were given amnesty for this, which was pretty bizarre for an authoritarian to do. Now, Wagner is going to have to join the military. Prigozhin is being exiled to Belarus, or I mean, I'm sure he could probably go somewhere else, but he has amnesty and can go to Belarus. I've seen multiple articles that were like, "How's he not dead yet?" Well, I think there's a give it time kind of thing. Something could still happen to him. But charges against Wagner were dropped. So that's Saturday, the 24th. Sunday, we're still talking about it. Monday, we're still talking about it. We can't get away from Prigozhin all week trying to figure this out. So, Sunday, Prigozhin says he is standing down. Prigozhin demonstrated the ability to generate public support, but this public support was not, yes, take over and take over Putin and free us and liberate us. No, it was, you need to be in charge so you can go turn the screws on Ukraine. That's the way that the people were saying this in the street. So you just have to understand that that's really what's going on. In Venezuela, Maduro was talking about how Putin was victorious after the insurrection. I mean, he survived, but I would hardly call that victorious. The feud is not over between Putin and Prigozhin. Now a former ally is now an enemy. In Ukraine, there's hope and trepidation and mocking memes, and they were way too excited about this in Ukraine. And I get it, I understand why, but they thought it was going to be a whole lot more than it was, so it was kind of anticlimactic when it ended. So there were articles about what comes after the mutiny, and Wagner rebellion reveals Putin's weaknesses, and then so some pro-Russians will talk about how this shows how strong Putin is. I don't think it shows how strong Putin is. Wagner's future remains uncertain. Some can fold into the Russian army. Others, you're free to go if you want to go, but Wagner's done, is essentially what the deal was. And then finally, one more article on Sunday last week. Russians dropped chemical projectile, but with the wind in their faces, so it kind of backfired on them, which is, so don't use chemical weapons, kids. Okay, Monday, the 26th of June, Russian Prime Minister calls on Russia to unite behind Putin. Now, when you have to call for people to unite behind someone, that's a bad situation. President Xi weighs in with support for Putin after the rebellion. Saw a news report where a commentator who has some deep background on China was talking about like Xi's taking notice about this, and it's not very pretty. Like this, that's actually the best part of this was that it takes Xi to step away from his ambitions in Taiwan because he doesn't want this kind of thing to happen to him. Putin's address said that Wagner had participated in this. They can all join the army. They can go to Belarus, and he lays out his address. And his address was pretty full-throated. I don't understand his address because he should have said not that they were coming for him, but I'm not going to allow you to mutiny against my army and my officers, because then it would focus on them, not on him. But I don't know what he's doing. The BBC said how Russia was pulling back from the brink of civil war. I don't think it was really a civil war. I think it was, I don't know what it was, but it was, I don't think it was ever going to be a civil war. RT said Putin seals Wagner's fate because he's such a strong, tough guy. Prigozhin says that it was a protest march, not overthrowing power. Now, Prigozhin has always had this weird angle about that, and I think that's sincerely where Prigozhin was. I don't think he ever was after Putin himself. That's just my read of it, but I mean, I could be wrong. Wagner shot down 6 helicopters and a plane during their march, and that all this overshadowed that Ukraine was actually taking a little bit of ground. In fact, it took a little ground that was held since 2014. So that's what was going on Monday. On Tuesday, there was an interesting article about the relatives of Wagner mutineers. They're angry. Like, they want Wagner to have the right military support so they can go give it to the Ukrainians. And I mean, that's really their perspective. So that's what they're angry about. RT talks about how Wagner is to hand over heavy weapons to Russian Ministry of Defense, and RT was also talking about how Western services inspired the Wagner revolt, according to the head of the Russian National Guard. But there is really no evidence that, like, the CIA or anybody else was connected. This is an intramural fight as far as I can detect. Putin's speech to defense ministry personnel came out that day, and Prigozhin soldiers are angry. They wanted something more than whatever they got. This was really a bad look. Some are crying conspiracy, and that's where we are on Tuesday. So we keep talking about Prigozhin. On Wednesday, Russia kills 11 as it strikes a pizzeria in Kramatorsk. Like, you use an Iskander missile on a pizzeria. And then RT carried an article that Moscow denied that it targeted the pizzeria because Russia does not attack civilian infrastructure. Wow. I mean, and they still are going to maintain that fiction in spite of everything that we know. RT, Zelensky moves to cancel traditional Christmas, and he sounds like the Grinch, but what he's doing is he is actually moving from Christmas being the Orthodox Christmas in January to December 25th as it's celebrated in the West. And I get how this could be thorny for some Orthodox believers in Ukraine, but it's trying to move out of the Russian orbit into a European-centered orbit. Did Servikin know ahead of time? That was the article today, and it looks like he might have. RT talks about how Central Asia is a soft underbelly of Russia and for the EU and the US to kind of, pick away at Putin and try to undermine him. And that's fair. But even China is doing that kind of thing. RT talked about how Biden said that Putin is losing the war in Iraq. Okay, Biden misspoke. If it was on Fox News, I would have thought it was funny and a little sad. When it's on RT, it makes me livid because I just don't like that that's my president. As much as I disagree with him on things, he's still my president. Africa or death for Prigozhin. There's another article. Traders don't get off lightly, so Prigozhin should be looking over his shoulder. For me, it seems like if I were to call it, I would say Prigozhin, move to Africa, work for some warlords, surround yourself with your most faithful mercenaries, and you have a chance of surviving. But it's not like he's taking my advice. MSNBC had an article, Prigozhin embodies the rot Putin wants to force on Ukraine, which is an interesting article because Prigozhin is a creature. He's a Frankenstein that Putin created. And then he's kind of emblematic of what Putin would import wholesale if it took over Ukraine, the same corruption that is deep in Russia. You talk about Ukraine being corrupt. Look at Russia's corruption. I mean, it's actually statistically worse. Okay. Yeah, the oligarchy, the kleptocracy. And there was actually in that article that talked about how Putin's war on Ukraine was a response to Ukrainian moves against their oligarchy, against their kleptocracy, against corruption. And it wasn't that fast, but it was moving that direction. Okay, there was also a UN report on Wednesday. Russia had executed 77 civilians detained by its forces. There's plenty of other war crimes to go around, but that particular report just came out on Wednesday. On Thursday, the SBU arrested a person helping Russians carry out that missile strike in Kramatorsk, which is pretty evil to be doing that. Like people sitting around in a pizzeria. BBC says that the failed Wagner coup showed that Putin's regime to be stubbornly strong. Now, that I don't know that I agree with that. Different people can have different opinions, and that's fine. But it seems like it exposed weakness. Yes, okay, it's stronger than you might have thought, but it's also exposed weakness that we didn't think could have happened, and now we think could happen. And now others are thinking about, I wonder what will happen the next time, or maybe the next time could be sooner than we thought. RT talked about how 2 Ukrainian generals killed in a strike and up to 50 officers, but again, it's RT, so I just can't verify that. RT also talked about the reason for the Wagner mutiny. He didn't want to be under the military. That's the general perception, but I think there's more to it than that because this has been brewing for some time. Wagner will not fight in the Ukrainian war, and that's the best thing that has happened yet because taking Wagner off the table or off the playing field in Ukraine is an awesome thing. Pence visits the Ukraine and he talks about how repelling Russian aggression is in the U.S. national interest. And he fully supports Ukraine and has made himself very different from Donald Trump in that regard. Prigozhin, owned by Russian military, determined to topple Putin was a headline and that he's owned by them. And so that headline, the article talked about how Prigozhin was working with these other generals and it was trying to take over. But they were saying it was to topple Putin. I don't know that it was to do that, but there was to gain some momentum, and it does look like there was some more of a conspiracy, but we'll see because certain generals will be, the FSB is working on this probably full time right now. Okay, Wagner mutiny shows cracks in Russia. Putin is out pressing the flesh and making speeches, and so that leads people to think, is that his body double? Because Putin doesn't really get out like that. But if you're an autocratic dictator and your life depends on this, forget COVID stuff, get out there and press the flesh. Could be a body double, might be the real thing. Doesn't really matter. He's doing what needs to be done. Zelensky says the Kremlin is weaker, fears mutinies and uprisings. Yes, they're going to be fury. It's like you take a guy with PTSD and then you put him out in the streets at night and then he's almost mugged. Now he's like extra worried about things. Putin's got to be really, really nervous right now. Finally, RT Seymour Hersh says it's going to take 117 years at the rate that the Ukrainians are going to take the territories from Russia. Seymour Hersh is smoking crack. There is no way that, okay, I get it. It's a snail theory. It was funny in Bakhmut, but here it's like, really, like he's trying to be serious about that. At least in the snail theory, they were like mocking and joking and saying, see, this they're just really bad at this. Seymour Hersh is really trying to show how, what fortress Russia is, but the defense lines are only 3 or 4 defense lines deep all around the edges. It's not like once they get in, they're going to have to experience the same defense lines again. So, okay. That's Thursday, the 29th of June. On Friday, alleged Russian spy to be charged for the strike in Kramatorsk. Kyiv's working on a new strategic initiative, trying to, still find that place where they can make a breakthrough. Seymour Hersh, again, is talking about how Ukraine's failure is a big problem for Biden. Again, he can't see anything that's not bad for the U.S. or pokes the U.S. in the eye. That's just where Seymour Hersh comes from, and so RT loves to republish him. In fact, he publishes his blog. Nobody else picks it up, but RT picks it up. But it is a big problem for Biden. He actually is right about that, like if Ukraine fails, that's a big problem for the Ukraine's backers. EU officials are concerned over a weaker Putin, and I think that's a proper interpretation of what happened. It's not like, look how strong and overcoming he is, like RT was touting. Biden administration should soon approve cluster munitions. That might take an act of Congress to get that through, but it might actually happen. Okay, that was Friday the 30th, and then Saturday, just a couple things. General Milley came out and said the counteroffensive will be long and bloody. It probably will be. It's not going to be a quick and easy thing, and that's unfortunate, but that's the actual state of what the war is. And then Belarus is building an army camp for Wagner. Yeah, if I was Lukashenko, I don't know that I would actually want to do that, but maybe he does. Maybe he thinks that there's some value here, and he won't potentially have a rebellion that you just saw. And then the new EU president, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, is visiting with Zelensky to show support. And that wraps up Saturday, July 1st. Okay, that's where we are with the events of the week. I hope that helps you kind of understand some context in Ukraine. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the subscribes, the coffees. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.